I'm Joseph, the lecturer at Meru University of Science and Technology in Kenya. And I'm pleased to talk about the Africa development of low carbon concrete policy. And just building up from what Professor Karen Scriven has just presented is that we expect a lot to be happening in Africa, a lot of action in terms of building and general construction. It's estimated that by 2050, the urban population is expected to be about 1.23 billion people. And with this, of course, the UN Habitat expects that a lot of people will be living in, the urban areas. And, currently, most of the people are predominantly living in the rural areas. And it's expected that, again, in the next 40 years, more than 50% again of the people will be actually living in the cities. That means that there will be a transition from the rural areas to the urban areas. And of course, looking at the map over here, we see that most of the fastest growing cities are economies are in Africa, and what we see is that most of the fast or rapidly urbanizing cities led by Lagos, Cairo, and Sababa, and so forth. Their population is rapidly increasing, and what this means is that as the population increases and urbanization rates are also increasing, there is growing backlog of housing of these people. And if you look at this graph here, we find that there is the backlog of housing vis-a-vis the urbanization growth. We see that there is a correlation in the sense that currently about 50, there's a backlog of about 50,000 housing units. Three-quarters of this is in sub-Saharan Africa. Again, this is explained by the fact that in sub-Saharan Africa, this is where we have got huge, rapid population growth and urbanization rate, and also about 200 million people in sub-Saharan Africa are actually living in the slums, and actually this seems to be the highest in the world. And of course, this calls for some action in terms of building, in terms of the demand for housing for these people. What are the dreams and aspirations of these people is that to live in affordable and a decent house. There's a lot of discussion going on touching on the kind of dreams and aspiration for the people in Africa, and one of them is building with timber. But when you talk about building with timber, we find that the policies in this country actually ban cutting down of trees. And when there's a shift to, building with timber, what this means is that it's going to erode the gains that have been there in terms of, increasing the vegetation cover in these countries. And what that means is that there will be, biodiversity loss, a lot of tourism activity, a lot of, nature that we find in sub-Saharan Africa is going to be destroyed because a lot of these trees are going to be cut down to, be used for construction activities. There has also been a lot of discussion in terms of the use of, earth and thatch. Like in the second illustration here. However, this is not true because what we find is that there is a lot of, repairs going on for this building. Every time it rains, we find that the house has been repaired. In any case, it doesn't really look decent, and no one wants to live there, in other words. This is an illusion that exists in some mind somewhere, but or reality, this is not true. There is no one who aspires in Africa to live in that and in other housing. What we find is that there is a lot of shift towards building with cement and concrete. That is in the third application, and for the simple reason that it's decent and it's durable. And because of this, there is a lot of initiatives that are going on to achieve that. And the next question we ask ourselves, who is actually doing the construction? There are several categories of people or organizations who are involved in the construction industry in Africa. And just to give you the landscape or the outlook of how the construction activity goes on in Africa, is that we have got some construction activity that or projects that are undertaken by the government, and most of these you find them anchored in what they are calling the affordable housing projects. So we have got government-initiated projects which are conducted by the government itself, doing the financing and the construction, of course, involving the local people and so forth. But this is a very small fraction of the houses. The other kind of houses are the private developers, and the private developers here represent the real estate companies which are involved in construction and so forth. We have got the local government and municipalities. This is just the cities and municipalities which do provide some subsidized sort of housing. They construct their houses, and thereafter they also, avail these houses to the citizens. We have got also construction being done by non-governmental organizations and the NGOs, but this is mostly focusing on the underprivileged communities, especially those who are vulnerable and so forth. But this again is a small fraction of that. There are community-based organizations like faith-based organizations who are doing some sort of construction, but again this is a small fraction. International agencies and donors again. The United Nations, but these are small initiatives. A lot is also happening with financial institutions like banks and private companies, but mostly this is for mortgage activity and to their kind of clients. Much of the construction is being done by individual developers and the construction workers. This is what we call the informal sector, where someone just, in your own, voluntarily, you just start to do your own construction. It's not so regulated, and it is what we call kind of the informal sector, and this is where a lot of construction is happening. So I emphasize the word not regulated because this is where the code of construction is normally has to be applied. But remember, these are people, these are individuals who are doing it without really having a lot of regulation or following a lot of regulations. And therefore, there has been a lot of activity. There's been a lot of issues like buildings collapsing, There's been a lot of issues like not being done by the skilled personnel, not having the required approvals, and so forth. So when you talk about the building codes, much of this is what happens after an incident has occurred. Maybe a building has collapsed, maybe there was fire, and so forth. What you need to note here is that a lot of code exists just to prescribe the construction requirements. How do you construct? Where do you construct? And so forth. And what kind of materials do you use? A lot of these building codes also are, talking about issues to do with energy conservation. How should the building be assessed? And more than 75% of the building codes that we find in Africa, they're talking about fire. I do know for strange reasons, they really emphasize a lot of issues about fire. And what we also need to realize here is that a lot of cones, also building cones, are imported, maybe from the global north. A lot of the building cones are imported from the global north. And a lot of this importation of the building cones happened for the last 40 years. And much of it has not been, revised to reflect the current climatic conditions, to reflect the realities in terms of the local materials which are there. And most of them, reading these documents, they look quite obsolete. And for that, if you look at that map on the other side, there is some regions that show even some countries where there is no existing, building code. There are others where it is really existing, like the category E, where you find these and these. These are officially, as per 2022. This is from the World Bank report 3 years ago. There are others where the document do not exist. And where they exist, it is like this was done, it was important, and it has been in place since 1960. That means that the document requires to be improved or requires to be revised a bit, and so forth. A lot of most of the countries which have, these building codes are now trying to adopt, Eurocodes, and they're trying to build what we call the national annexures. The national annexures are what prescribes exactly what is happening. I have found it a bit strange at times in some countries where we find even in the building code, you find that talking about even, freeze and thaw. In countries like, in Sahara Desert, there's freeze and thaw. So you can imagine how that document really, it's a bit interesting to look. I don't know where it happens in some part of sub-Saharan Africa where you find freeze and thaw, but reading some of those documents, that's the reality. So what are some of the steps towards low carbon cement? For us to achieve low carbon concrete, one of the key things is, of course, talking about, the low carbon cement. And in low carbon cement, we have to look at the existing cement standards, and the existing cement standards, again, do not reflect the realities we find in sub-Saharan Africa. We find a lot of this, cement, talking about slag, talking about fly ash, and so forth. This industrial byproduct. Most of the countries in sub-Saharan Africa and in Africa are not industrialized. And therefore, talking about slag, talking about fly ash, these are materials that are very, very minimal in terms of quantities in these countries. And we find that these standards, again, exclude or do not have the materials, the local, I would call pozzolans, which could be, exploited or used to produce low carbon cement, like, calcined clays, as one of them. So there is a lot of discussion now going on in terms of amendment of these standards to reflect the climatic conditions, to reflect the local raw materials, to reflect the prices of those countries, because when these countries imported the standards from the global north, they came with the prices of the global north. They came with the materials that are found in the global north. So there's a lot of amendments now that is happening on this. However, this requires a lot of financing, and for that to happen, of course, it's what we are calling the green financing. We have got some, financial organizations which are now focusing on supporting the development of the standards and so forth. There is also the bilateral agreements, which, like, for example, the Switzerland and its partners through CRIC Foundation funding some of these activities. Now, there's also the issue of the public awareness campaigns, where people now are talking about, coming up with roadmaps for decarbonization. And in the roadmap for decarbonization is where the issue of the standards is really coming up, and so forth. Because for even the cement companies to produce low carbon cement, there must be a standard to exist for them to be able to produce and sell their product. The companies cannot produce something they cannot be able to sell. So there is a lot of public awareness that is going on and is needed. Of course, currently it's not to a very high level, but there's some discussion now going on along these lines. We've got this project that we are working with Professor Karen Scrivener and other partners, and we have got a technical resource center for limestone calcined clay cement. And in this technical resource center, what we are doing is trying to support the uptake of limestone calcined clay cement in sub-Saharan Africa. When I talk about supporting the uptake of limestone calcined clay in sub-Saharan Africa, why sub-Saharan Africa? Is again because sub-Saharan Africa is we have got a lot of countries here which have got high population growth, high urbanization rates. Again, this is why we have got, the future construction activity is taking place in the next decades. So for this particular reason, we are the Technical Resource Center support the identification of clays. Where are these clays? Because someone would be asking, where are the clays so that we produce? Again, how do we produce LC3? So this Technical Resource Center, we support in terms of the technical advice and with our geologists through lab testing, the uptake of limestone calcined clay. Just some images of this technical resource center that was inaugurated 2 years ago. Up there, you can see Professor Karen Scrivener opening the center, and Professor Shanshank Pshnoi. And it was such a big event, so just some photos that happened 2 years ago. In terms of standards, the Technical Resource Center, I'm just using this as a case example of how we can inform and how we can engage stakeholders in order to, arrive at low carbon policies and so forth. And this is one of the initiatives which we have within Sub-Saharan Africa. Of course, these are about 48 countries of them. And so far, we are doing some work to develop a low, to develop low LC3 standard in Malawi, and we have been on this. It's a one-year project. Currently, when we talk about the standards in East Africa, the standards in East Africa are mostly the European norm standards, which are in operation. However, we look at the provisions within the standards, and we realize that for composite cement, the EN 197 Part 5 allows clinker substitution up to 50%. And what we have been talking about now with the recent research that has been conducted, there is a potential now to also allow for clinker substitution of up to 35%. And we've been working, having this discussion. Ghana has already adopted LC335, that means limestone calcined clay cement with a clinker factor of that 5% in it, which is quite good because that allows people to make low carbon concrete. At East Africa level, again, as I've mentioned, we are working in the 8 countries which are in the East Africa community. And in these 8 countries, because they are using a common standard, so we are adopting, we are further, amending EN 197 Part 5, where there is a clinker reduction of 50, and now we are taking it to that 5% replacement. Already this has been accepted by the 8 member states in these countries, and now it is at the balloting stage. So that means it is quite advanced, because after the balloting, the standard will be published. And this is one of the small things that we can do to make a big difference in terms of, achieving low carbon concrete. Because once the standard is, gazetted, then the cement companies can be able to produce. And when the cement companies produce, then the consumers can use low carbon cement, and they can make the low carbon concrete. So in conclusion, there's a lot that we can do in terms of, aligning, policy alignment for, carbon reduction or low carbon concrete. And one of them is expansion of sustainable investment in and finance initiatives, where we find, there needs to be some push or some, focus in terms of investing, in terms of financing the low carbon initiatives that are going there in terms of standard development and so forth. Tax policies that discourage, carbon intensive choices. We've got, of course, a market where, even if you use carbon intensive materials, there's no deterrent. But if there's a policy change in some of these countries, then this can really go a long way to promote low carbon concrete. So there are a number of aspects or initiatives that can be undertaken here. One of them is also the low carbon business models, and under this, we talk about also the issue of the green procurement and for the purchase of or importation of materials and raw materials which do not allow low carbon materials, then that business model is discouraged. And this is at policy level, and mostly this is an initiative that can be taken up easily by the government. The last one is creating incentives for transitioning to low carbon development pathways. And one of the incentives I have mentioned here is the issue of standard amendments. amendment of a standard on its own is an incentive for people to produce, because no one can produce something that they cannot be able to take to the market. And with that, I thank you for your attention.